What would you do if the only thing your grandfather left you was a piece of land everyone called worthless, and the men who wanted it tried to bury you alive before you could learn why? After surviving a fall into a deadly canyon, one young cowboy discovers a hidden secret that powerful men have spent decades killing to protect. But the greatest treasure waiting beneath the desert isn't gold. It's the truth. If you enjoy stories of courage, justice, and second chances, subscribe now and join us for this unforgettable journey. A dry autumn wind swept across the red mesas surrounding Redemption Creek, carrying dust through brittle sagebrush beneath a cloudless Arizona sky where the afternoon sun seemed determined to bleach every color from the land. 26-year-old Ethan Brooks tightened his grip on the worn leather envelope resting across his saddle. Tall and broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, he carried the quiet strength of someone accustomed to solving problems with steady hands rather than loud words. Thick dark brown hair curled beneath his weathered cowboy hat, while a neatly trimmed beard framed a square jaw that rarely betrayed emotion. His steel blue eyes often appeared older than his years, shaped by a childhood that had stolen both parents before he was old enough to remember their voices. From that day forward, his grandfather had become his entire world, teaching him that a man's character was measured not by what he owned, but by what he protected. Walter Brooks had never been a wealthy rancher. His hands were permanently rough, his back bent by decades beneath the desert sun, yet he possessed an unshakable honesty that earned quiet respect across the valley. On the final evening before illness claimed him, he had pressed a folded land deed into Ethan's hand with a faint smile. "Most folks only see rocks," he had whispered. "Don't ever mistake empty ground for worthless ground." Those words echoed through Ethan's thoughts as Redemption Creek came into view. The small frontier town buzzed with afternoon chatter, but conversations softened as he entered the land office carrying Walter's papers. Several townspeople exchanged amused glances, already aware of the forgotten parcel near Black Hollow. They believed the old man had left his grandson nothing more than cracked earth, thorny cactus, and endless disappointment. Before Ethan could reach the clerk's desk, the office door swung open. Caleb Turner stepped inside with the effortless confidence of a man accustomed to obedience. Near 50, Caleb stood powerfully built beneath an expensive black coat, his silver-streaked dark hair carefully combed, his close-cropped beard impeccably maintained. His polite smile rarely reached his cold gray eyes, and beneath his calm voice lived the quiet arrogance of someone who had controlled Redemption Creek for longer than most could remember. Men greeted him with forced respect, while those who disagreed usually found reasons to leave town soon afterward. Caleb glanced at the deed before chuckling softly. "Your grandfather left you Black Hollow," he asked. "That's generous, if his intention was to teach you disappointment." Laughter rippled through the room. Ethan refused to react. He simply folded the document and turned toward the door. The laughter mattered less than Walter's final words. Outside, Caleb's two ranch hands intercepted him with friendly smiles and claimed they knew a shortcut leading to the exact survey marker on the property. Ethan hesitated only briefly before following them toward the lonely canyon, believing he was finally about to understand why his grandfather had guarded that forgotten piece of land until his final breath. Pain arrived before memory. Ethan Brooks opened his eyes to a ceiling of blazing blue sky, framed by towering red cliffs that seemed to close around him like the walls of a giant prison. Every breath sent fire through his ribs. His left shoulder scraped against rough sandstone, and dried blood clung to the sleeve of his faded denim shirt. For several long moments, he could hear nothing except the pounding of his own heartbeat. Then everything returned. Caleb Turner, the false smiles. The shove. Ethan forced himself upright, every movement demanding more strength than he thought remained. Looking toward the canyon rim, he found only empty sky. His horse was gone. His grandfather's deed was gone. Even the footprints above had already disappeared beneath drifting desert dust. Black Hollow had swallowed him exactly as Caleb intended. A bitter laugh escaped his cracked lips before silence settled over him once again. He had spent years believing that hard work could solve almost anything. Down here, effort alone meant nothing. Without water, the canyon would finish what Caleb had started. The afternoon sun climbed higher, turning every rock into a furnace. Ethan searched the canyon floor for anything useful: broken cactus, loose shale, dry shrubs that crumbled beneath his boots. Nothing promised survival. His throat burned so fiercely that swallowing became painful. As exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, another memory surfaced with remarkable clarity. Walter Brooks had once taken him across the desert during a summer cattle drive when Ethan was barely 12. They had stopped beside a stretch of barren ground almost identical to Black Hollow. Walter had knelt, pressed one weathered hand against the earth, and smiled. The driest land, he had said, usually hides the deepest water. Most men die because they stop looking one step too soon. Back then, Ethan had thought it was another lesson about ranching. Now he wondered if it had been something more. Determined to keep moving, he crawled toward the shade of a fractured cliff. That was when something unusual caught his attention. Against the endless blanket of red dust lay a narrow ribbon of darker earth no wider than 2 fingers. The soil looked slightly damp. He touched it. Cool. Not wet enough to drink, but unmistakably cooler than everything around it. His pulse quickened. Instead of disappearing beneath the sun, the faint moisture seemed to continue beneath scattered stones. Ethan ignored the stabbing pain in his side and followed the tiny trail across the canyon floor. Every few yards, the dark streak faded, only to appear again beyond another cluster of rocks. Someone unfamiliar with the desert would never have noticed it. Walter would have. The trail ended beneath an enormous slab of fallen sandstone leaning against the canyon wall. At first glance, it looked like a dead end. Ethan nearly turned away before a faint current of cool air brushed across his face. Air. There shouldn't have been moving air behind solid rock. He dropped to one knee and began pulling away loose gravel with bleeding hands. Pebbles rolled aside until a narrow opening appeared between 2 massive boulders. It was barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. The cool breeze flowed steadily from the darkness beyond. Ignoring every instinct warning him against entering an unknown cave, Ethan forced himself sideways through the crack. His shirt caught against the stone more than once before he finally slipped inside. Instantly the temperature changed. The suffocating desert heat vanished, replaced by cool stillness scented with damp limestone. Water glistened across the stone floor in tiny silver threads that disappeared deeper underground. The passage sloped gently downward. After several cautious minutes, the narrow tunnel widened into a natural chamber larger than any barn Ethan had ever entered. He stopped breathing. 3 heavy iron-bound chests rested against the far wall beneath decades of dust. Nearby stood weathered wooden crates stacked with surprising care. Several old rifles wrapped in faded canvas leaned untouched in one corner, their wooden stocks darkened with age. None of it looked abandoned by accident. Someone had hidden this place. Near the smallest chest sat a square tin box sealed with hardened red wax. Unlike the treasure surrounding it, the box bore an unfamiliar brand burned into the metal, a rearing black stallion enclosed inside a circle. Walter had carved that exact symbol onto the handle of his old branding knife years ago. Ethan's heart hammered against his aching ribs. His grandfather hadn't left him worthless land. He had left him the doorway to a secret someone had been willing to kill for. Slowly, Ethan reached toward the sealed box, unaware that its contents were about to rewrite the history of the entire valley. The sealed tin box remained tucked safely beneath Ethan Brooks's coat as he left the hidden chamber. He resisted every temptation to break the wax seal. Whatever his grandfather had protected for so many years deserved patience, not panic. Climbing back through the narrow passage demanded every ounce of strength he had left. By the time he reached the canyon floor, his vision blurred with exhaustion. Blood had soaked through his sleeve again. His lips were cracked beyond feeling, and each step became shorter than the last. He managed only a few hundred yards before collapsing beside a weathered cottonwood growing improbably from a narrow spring-fed wash near the canyon's edge. Several miles away, 34-year-old Grace Miller guided her chestnut mare through the rocky foothills surrounding Black Hollow. She was taller than most women in the valley, with strong shoulders earned from years of repairing fences, hauling feed, and running a ranch without help. Her sun-kissed skin carried the marks of countless seasons outdoors, while long auburn hair rested in a practical braid beneath a faded brown hat. Calm green eyes revealed quiet intelligence rather than softness, and although neighbors often described her as distant, those who truly knew her understood that grief had changed her. 3 years earlier, her husband Daniel had died after a flash flood swept away both him and half their cattle during a summer roundup. Since then, Grace trusted hard work more than conversation. She had spent the morning searching for Buck, her 15-year-old bay gelding. Buck was no longer fast, but his broad frame, scarred muzzle, and remarkably gentle temperament had carried the Miller family through countless cattle drives. Age had stiffened his joints, yet his instincts remained sharper than those of horses half his age. Grace finally spotted Buck standing perfectly still near the mouth of Black Hollow. The old horse was staring toward a cluster of rocks instead of grazing. That alone felt wrong. Buck had learned long ago never to waste energy without reason. Grace dismounted quietly and followed his line of sight. At first she noticed only scattered footprints, drops of dried blood, and disturbed gravel leading away from the canyon. Then she saw the man lying motionless beneath the cottonwood. Her pulse quickened. She knelt beside him, brushing dust away from his face. He looked young, perhaps 26 or 27, though pain had aged him considerably during the past day. His dark beard was matted with dirt, bruises covered one side of his face, and his breathing came in shallow, uneven rhythms, still alive, barely. Grace uncorked her canteen and allowed only a few careful drops of water onto his lips. Years of ranch life had taught her never to force too much water upon someone suffering from severe dehydration. Ethan's eyes fluttered open. For a single confused moment, he thought he was looking at his mother from one of Walter's faded photographs. Then reality returned. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered weakly. Grace almost smiled. "Neither should you." Without wasting another second, she secured Ethan across Buck's broad back before climbing into the saddle behind him. The slow ride to her ranch lasted nearly 2 hours. Buck seemed to understand every careful instruction, avoiding loose stones and steep slopes, as though he recognized the fragile life resting across his shoulders. Grace's cabin stood alone, where rolling grassland met the desert. Built from weathered pine logs, it overlooked a modest corral, a vegetable garden, and a small creek that never completely dried, even during harsh summers. Everything about the place reflected quiet discipline rather than comfort. For the next 4 days, Ethan drifted between fever and restless dreams. Grace cleaned his wounds twice each day, using boiled water and medicinal herbs her late husband had once learned from an Apache ranch hand. She reset his injured shoulder, wrapped his bruised ribs as tightly as possible, and prepared simple meals of broth and fresh bread whenever he could swallow. She asked almost nothing. Ethan noticed that silence seemed natural to her. It reminded him of Walter. On the 5th morning, sunlight spilled across the cabin floor as Ethan finally gathered enough strength to sit upright. His hand immediately reached beneath the folded blanket. The sealed tin box was still there. Grace had neither opened it nor taken it away. She noticed the movement but continued sharpening a kitchen knife without looking up. "I figured," she said calmly, "whatever a dying man protects that tightly is probably worth more than money." Ethan studied her for a long moment before answering. "It may explain why someone tried to kill me." Grace stopped sharpening. For the first time since meeting him, their eyes met in complete understanding. Whatever had happened inside Black Hollow was no ordinary robbery. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. 6 days after Ethan Brooks arrived at the Miller Ranch, the strength had mostly returned to his body. His ribs still ached, and his shoulder protested whenever he moved too quickly, but waiting any longer felt impossible. Whatever secrets Walter Brooks had hidden inside the sealed tin box had already cost at least one life and nearly claimed another. The morning sky hung low with gray clouds as Ethan and Grace Miller rode toward Black Hollow. Buck carried supplies while Grace's mare followed the winding trail through the desert. Neither spoke much. Both understood that answers waited beneath the canyon. The hidden passage remained untouched. Inside the chamber, Ethan carefully placed the tin box atop a flat stone. For several seconds he simply stared at the hardened red wax seal. His grandfather's symbol seemed almost alive beneath the lantern light. Then he broke it. Inside rested two thick leather-bound ledgers, several bundles of yellowed letters tied with fading blue ribbon, and a folded map drawn by hand. Dust rose as Ethan opened the first book. Within minutes, both he and Grace realized they were holding far more than forgotten records. Every page contained names, dates, locations, payments, livestock counts, and gold shipments. The documents belonged to the infamous Dust River Gang, an outlaw group that had supposedly vanished nearly 20 years earlier. Grace turned another page slowly. Her expression hardened. The ledger wasn't simply documenting crimes. It documented partnerships. Beside lists of stolen cattle appeared payments made to respected businessmen. Beside reports of robberies appeared names of town officials who received portions of the profits. Several entries referenced private meetings with local leaders in Redemption Creek. Again and again, one name appeared: Caleb Turner. The deeper they read, the darker the truth became. Letters written by the gang's former leader described secret arrangements with Caleb. The outlaws stole livestock, gold shipments, and land deeds. Caleb provided information, buyers, and protection. Together they built fortunes while ordinary ranchers struggled to survive. One brittle letter revealed the final betrayal. Years earlier, Caleb had promised the Dust River Gang safe passage out of the territory after one last robbery. Instead, he secretly informed Sheriff Thomas Reed and arranged an ambush. Sheriff Reed, celebrated for decades as a frontier hero, had led the attack that killed most of the gang. The town believed justice had prevailed. The letters proved otherwise. Caleb and Reed had divided the stolen wealth among themselves and several influential citizens. The gang died. The conspirators became community leaders. Grace lowered the letter slowly. Her green eyes reflected equal parts anger and disbelief. "Everything this town respects was built on murder," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. Then he unfolded the final document, the map. A series of notes written in Walter Brooks's unmistakable handwriting covered the margins. Walter had discovered fragments of the conspiracy years earlier while working cattle near Black Hollow. The map showed locations of hidden evidence, old campsites, and witness accounts gathered over decades. One sentence near the bottom made Ethan's chest tighten. "If you're reading this, Caleb finally learned what I know." Walter had anticipated danger. He had known someone might come looking. Before Ethan could process the realization, a distant sound echoed through the tunnel. Footsteps. Both froze. A figure appeared at the entrance moments later. Mason Cole. Unlike Caleb's polished appearance, Mason looked rough and dangerous. At 38, he possessed a lean, wolf-like build shaped by years of violence. Dark stubble covered his narrow face, a jagged scar crossed his left cheek, and his cold brown eyes constantly searched for weakness. Most people in Redemption Creek avoided him whenever possible. Rumors claimed he had worked as a bounty hunter before becoming Caleb's most trusted enforcer. Mason smiled when he spotted them. "There you are." His hand rested casually near his revolver. "You've caused Mr. Turner quite a bit of trouble." Ethan stepped in front of the documents. Mason noticed immediately. The smile vanished. Then thunder shook the canyon. Everyone glanced upward. The storm arrived with shocking speed. Rain hammered the desert above, and within minutes a deep roar surged through Black Hollow. Flash floods were common in Arizona, deadly, unpredictable. Water exploded across the canyon floor outside. Escape vanished instantly. All three were trapped. Mason reacted first, drawing his revolver. Ethan lunged. The gun discharged, the deafening blast echoing through the chamber. Stone fragments sprayed from the wall. Mason drove Ethan backward, but the injury in Ethan's shoulder weakened him. Grace moved without hesitation. She grabbed a heavy iron lock from one of the old chests and struck Mason across the side of the head. The blow staggered him. Ethan seized the opportunity and tackled him into the cavern wall. The struggle ended moments later. Together they wrestled Mason to the ground and secured his wrists with leather straps from Buck's supply pack. Outside, floodwaters continued, roaring through Black Hollow. Inside, silence returned. The ledgers remained intact. The letters survived. Walter's map remained safe, and now, for the first time, Ethan and Grace possessed something even more valuable than evidence. They had a living witness who knew exactly how far Caleb Turner had gone to keep the truth buried. The storm finally loosened its grip on Black Hollow shortly before sunrise. Water still trickled through the canyon floor, but the violent flood had passed. Ethan Brooks and Grace Miller waited until the current became safe enough to cross before leading Buck through the narrow passage. Mason Cole remained bound with rawhide straps, his bruised face silent now that he realized escape was impossible. Ethan secured Walter Brooks's map, the ledgers, the letters, and the sealed bundles inside waterproof canvas before they began the long ride north. They did not return to Redemption Creek. Caleb Turner still controlled too many men there. Their destination was Prescott, nearly 2 days away. The journey was exhausting. Ethan's ribs reminded him of every mile, while Grace rarely allowed herself more than a few hours of sleep. Mason remained under constant watch. By the second evening, his confidence had begun to fade. He finally understood that Caleb's influence ended where federal law began. The United States Marshal's office occupied a sturdy stone building overlooking Prescott's busy courthouse square. Waiting inside was Marshal Daniel Hayes, a man whose reputation had spread across Arizona territory long before Ethan ever arrived. 58 years old, Hayes stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that age had failed to diminish. Thick silver hair framed a deeply weathered face, and his neatly trimmed white beard surrounded a mouth that rarely smiled without reason. Calm hazel eyes studied people patiently rather than judging them quickly. Years earlier, his younger brother had been murdered by corrupt lawmen during a mining dispute, leaving Hayes with an unwavering belief that justice meant little unless it reached powerful men, as well as ordinary citizens. He listened without interruption. Ethan placed Walter's map on the desk first, then the letters, then the ledgers. Finally, Mason was brought into the room. Hayes questioned him quietly for nearly an hour. At first, Mason denied everything, but every lie collapsed beneath another page of Walter's evidence. Eventually, his shoulders sagged. He confessed, not only to Ethan's attempted murder, but to years spent carrying orders between Caleb Turner and the remaining members of the conspiracy. Hayes closed the final ledger. "The truth has been buried long enough," he said. Within 24 hours, a federal posse rode toward Redemption Creek. The arrests came before sunrise. Caleb Turner was taken from his own office before most of the town had awakened. The local physician, whose false medical reports had protected Caleb's crimes for years, left his clinic in handcuffs. Several council members were arrested alongside wealthy ranch owners whose names filled Walter's records. Shock spread through the valley faster than any wildfire. Men once admired as founders of the community stood exposed as thieves, murderers, and conspirators. Ethan watched quietly from across the street. He felt no satisfaction, only peace. Months passed. Spring returned to Black Hollow. The forgotten land looked different now. Water flowed steadily from the underground spring Walter had always believed existed. Wildflowers colored the hillsides after winter rains, and young cottonwood trees stretched fresh green leaves toward the bright Arizona sky. A modest cabin gradually rose beside the spring. Every log Ethan placed reminded him of the grandfather who had believed in him long before he believed in himself. The recovered outlaw gold never became Ethan's fortune. Following the federal investigation, most of it was returned to government ownership or distributed to families whose property had been stolen decades earlier. The remaining legal portion funded a new schoolhouse, repaired roads, and brought an honest physician to Redemption Creek. Walter would have approved. Grace visited often. Sometimes she arrived carrying fresh bread. Sometimes she helped repair fencing or tend the small vegetable garden growing beside the spring. Other evenings they simply sat on the porch, watching Buck graze peacefully beneath the fading sunset without feeling the need to fill the silence. Their friendship changed slowly. Neither rushed it. Both understood that the strongest things in life were built patiently. One quiet evening, Ethan unfolded Walter's final handwritten note one last time. Beneath all the maps and careful observations stood a single sentence written in steady ink. Asterisk, if this land ever gives you the truth, Don't waste your life chasing the gold. Build something worthy on top of it. Asterisk. Ethan folded the paper carefully and looked toward the cabin standing where everyone else had once seen only worthless ground. Walter had never been protecting treasure. He had been protecting the chance for someone honest to rebuild what greed had destroyed. Grace stepped onto the porch, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Without a word, she handed one to Ethan. Together they watched the spring flow quietly across the land that had changed both of their lives. At last, Ethan understood the inheritance his grandfather had truly left behind. It was never measured in gold. It was measured in courage, truth, and the home 2 wounded hearts had chosen to build together. Sometimes life doesn't leave us with easy answers. Sometimes what looks like a dead end becomes the place where hope quietly begins again. Ethan inherited a piece of forgotten land, but what truly changed his life wasn't the gold hidden beneath it. It was the courage to keep searching when everyone else had already given up, the kindness of a stranger who chose compassion over fear, and the quiet belief that truth is always worth protecting. Perhaps all of us carry our own version of Black Hollow, a season of loss, disappointment, or uncertainty that feels impossible to escape. And perhaps, just like Ethan, we never really know what may be waiting beyond one more step forward. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us which moment stayed with you the most. If you enjoy heartfelt stories about courage, hope, and second chances, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more unforgettable journeys. Until we meet again, may God bless you, watch over your family, fill your home with peace, and guide your path with hope wherever life leads you.